China in the 4th–3rd centuries was a mosaic torn by internal conflicts. 7 powerful states, Qin, Chu, Qi, Yan, Han, Zhao, and Wei, battled each other, each striving to assert its hegemony. Fields were irrigated with blood, cities were destroyed, and the people lived in constant fear. However, it was in this chaos that a dream of a unified heaven ripened, a peaceful empire governed by a wise ruler. And this dream found its embodiment in the house of the Qin state, located on the western fringes, known for its severity, bellicosity, and adherence to legalism, a philosophical school advocating strict, centralized power and rigorous laws. In 259 BCE, in Handan, the capital of the Zhao state, Ying Zheng was born in captivity, where his father, Zhuangxiang, at that time merely Prince Zichu, had fallen. His origins were shrouded in mystery and gossip, which only added drama to his future greatness. Widespread rumors claimed that his true father was not the prince, but the influential merchant and regent Lü Buwei, who skillfully manipulated events for his own ambitions. Whether this was true forever remained veiled by history, but these suspicions accompanied Ying Zheng throughout his life, possibly shaping his distrustful and authoritarian character. Ying Zheng's family returned to Qin in 251 BCE, when his grandfather, King Xiaowen, ascended the throne. However, his grandfather ruled for only 1 year, and his father, Zhuangxiang, for only 3. In 247 BCE, at the age of 13, the young Ying Zheng was proclaimed King of Qin. Due to his young age, effective power was concentrated in the hands of Regent Lü Buwei, who by then had become chancellor. It was a time of intrigues, conspiracies, and power struggles. The young king grew up observing complex political games, learning to identify enemies and allies, comprehending the art of power in the harshest conditions. In 258 BCE, upon reaching adulthood, Ying Zheng demonstrated his iron will and determination. He removed Lü Buwei from power, accusing him of conspiracy, and exiled him. This was followed by purges of other influential courtiers who dared to challenge his authority. The rebellion of Lao Ai, his mother, the Dowager Queen's favorite, held a special place in these events. This episode, full of drama and cruelty, only strengthened Ying Zheng's conviction in the necessity of mercilessly suppressing any resistance and maximizing the centralization of power. He became the sole, undisputed ruler of Qin, ready for the greatest achievements. By that time, the Qin state was already the most powerful of all 7. Its army, hardened by continuous wars, was characterized by discipline, ferocity, and effectiveness based on legalist principles where every warrior was valued and every transgression strictly punished. The economy prospered thanks to extensive irrigation projects, such as the Dujianyan Canal, which transformed Sichuan into a rich granary. The philosophy of legalism, with its emphasis on a strong state, strict laws, and the promotion of agriculture and war, was ideally suited for realizing the ambitious plan of unifying China. The young King Ying Zheng, possessing exceptional energy, intellect, and fearlessness, was the ideal instrument for realizing this grand yet terrifying dream. The Sword of Unification, the Fall of the 6 States. From the moment Ying Zheng fully seized the reins of power, he directed all the resources and might of the Qin state towards achieving his cherished goal, the unification of all under heaven under a single authority. This was a task of colossal complexity, requiring strategic genius, indomitable will, and ruthless efficiency. The Qin state had been preparing for this moment for decades, developing its war machine, perfecting its administrative governance, and implementing legalist principles that made its state unusually strong and centralized. Beginning in 230 BCE, Qin armies, led by talented generals such as Wang Jian and Li Xian, descended upon neighboring states one after another. Each campaign was meticulously planned, combining brute military force with diplomatic intrigues, bribery, and psychological warfare. Ying Zheng understood that to achieve complete victory, it was necessary not only to break resistance on the battlefield, but also to undermine the enemy's morale and strip away its internal support. Han fell first in 230 BCE. It was the smallest and weakest of the 7 states. Its annexation became a harbinger of coming changes, demonstrating that Qin would stop at nothing. Then Zhao fell in 228 BCE, despite stubborn resistance and the presence of outstanding generals. The capture of Zhao was particularly significant, as it was in its capital that Ying Zheng had spent his early years. The cruelty displayed in suppressing Zhao's resistance served as a grim warning to the others. In 225 BCE, Qin captured Wei, destroying its capital, Daiyang, by flooding it. This was not only an act of war, but also a demonstration of Qin's engineering prowess and its ability to use natural forces against its enemies. Chu followed in 223 BCE. Chu was the largest in territory and one of the most powerful states, and its conquest required a long and bloody campaign in which a huge Qin army under the command of Wang Jian participated. This was the last obstacle on the path to complete hegemony. Yin was next to last, falling in 222 BCE after several years of guerrilla warfare and a desperate but unsuccessful assassination attempt on Ying Zheng himself. The last resisting state was Qi in the east, which, seeing the futility of resistance, surrendered without a fight in 221 BCE. Thus, by 221 BCE, all 6 states had been conquered. The land of all under heaven, torn apart by centuries of wars, was finally united under one power, the power of Qin. This was a monumental achievement, unparalleled in Chinese history. After the unification, Ying Zheng proclaimed himself with a new title, Huangdi, Emperor, combining the 2 ancient titles Huang, sovereign, and Di, god ancestor or emperor, and adding the prefix Shi, first, to it. Thus he became Qin Shi Huangdi, the first emperor of Qin. This title did not merely denote him as a ruler, it elevated him above all preceding kings, proclaiming him the sole true sovereign, possessing the mandate of heaven. He dreamed that his dynasty would rule for 10,000 generations. The new state demanded a new ideology and a new order. Qin Shi Huangdi and his chief advisor, Li Su, a staunch proponent of legalism, embarked on large-scale reforms. They abolished the old aristocracy and feudal system, replacing it with a centralized administrative structure. The empire was divided into 36, later 40, provinces commanderies, or jun, which in turn were divided into counties, or sin. Each province was headed by a civil governor, a military commandant, and an inspector, appointed by the emperor and entirely accountable to him. This ensured strict control over all corners of the vast empire. But the unification of territories was only the first step. To cement the empire, total unification was required. Qin Shi Huangdi introduced a unified writing system based on Qin script, which was of colossal importance for China's cultural unity. He standardized weights and measures, creating a single system for the entire empire. A unified monetary system was introduced with a round coin with a square hole, which remained the model for Chinese coins for 2 millennia. Even the width of chariot axles was standardized to ensure unhindered movement on the new roads that were built throughout the empire, connecting its distant parts. These reforms were revolutionary. They laid the foundation for a unified, centralized Chinese state, which persisted with minor changes for centuries. They created the basis for a great Chinese civilization, defining its cultural and political identity. But behind this grand dream of unity and order lay another side: tyranny, cruelty, and the ruthless suppression of any dissent. The sword that unified China became an instrument of its subjugation. Burning books and burying scholars, war on thought. After unifying all under heaven, Qin Shi Huangdi faced a new problem: how to preserve this unity and ensure unquestioning obedience in such a vast and diverse empire. The answer lay in total control not only over the body, but also over the mind. At the core of his policy was the doctrine of legalism, which proclaimed that only a strong state and harsh laws could maintain order. All other philosophical schools, especially Confucianism, with their emphasis on morality, tradition, personal ethics, and historical precedents, were perceived as a threat to the new order. They were a source of criticism, dissent, and potential discord. Confucians, as well as representatives of other schools, such as Moism or Taoism, relied on ancient texts and historical examples to condemn despotism and praise more humane forms of government. They often quoted ancient wise rulers, contrasting their rule with that of Qin Shi Huangdi. For the emperor and his chief advisor Li Si, who himself was a former student of the Confucian philosopher Xunzi but had embraced legalism, this was unacceptable. Dissent, even when expressed in the form of scholarly debates, posed a danger, as it could sow doubt in people's hearts and undermine the authority of the state. In 213 BCE, at an imperial banquet, one scholar, Zhao Xingqian, praised Qin Shi Huangdi for unifying the empire and establishing a new system. However, another scholar, Chunyu Yue, a Confucian by conviction, objected, pointing out that to maintain stability, the emperor should restore the feudal system and appoint relatives as local rulers, citing examples from ancient dynasties. This was a direct challenge to the emperor's centralizing policy. Li Si, seizing this opportunity, presented a memorial proposing radical measures. He argued that private schools and private study of history were sources of criticism and discord. Scholars, relying on ancient texts, condemned the present based on the past, undermining trust in the government. To put an end to this, Li Si proposed an unprecedented step: the total burning of books. The emperor accepted Li Si's proposal. An edict was issued according to which all books, with the exception of those dealing with practical knowledge, medicine, pharmacology, divination, agriculture, and Qin history, were to be burned. Private individuals were obliged to surrender their books to the state for destruction. Those who dared to hide forbidden books faced severe punishment: branding, and 4 years of hard labor on the construction of the Great Wall of China. Those who discussed ancient books were subject to public execution. Officials who knew of violations but did not report them faced the same punishment. This was a true cultural catastrophe. A huge number of invaluable historical, philosophical, and literary works were destroyed. Only copies kept in the imperial library survived, but they too later perished in a fire during the fall of the Qin dynasty. The goal was clear: to deprive future generations of a connection to the past, to erase dissent, leaving only the official version of history and the sole permitted ideology, legalism. But the repressions did not end there. The history, as recounted by Sima Qian, the chief Chinese historian, testifies to an even more horrifying act. In 212 BCE, a year after the edict on burning books, the emperor, obsessed with the search for immortality and intolerant of criticism, brutally dealt with scholars. According to Sima Qian, two fraudulent alchemists, Ho Sheng and Lu Sheng, whom Qin Shi Huangdi trusted to find the elixir of immortality, fled, leaving behind accusations against the emperor, calling him a despot and a tyrant. This enraged the emperor. He declared that some scholars who study in the capital are spreading falsehoods to confuse the black-headed people, common folk. He ordered the arrest of all scholars in the capital and subjected them to interrogation to identify those who had slandered him. As a result of this investigation, 460 scholars were found guilty, and then Qin Shi Huangdi ordered an unprecedented execution. These 460 scholars were buried alive in a large pit. This horrifying act went down in history as Fenshu Keng Ru, the burning of books and burying of Confucians. The word Confucians, Ru itself, became a byword for the victims of this massacre, although representatives of other philosophical schools may also have been among them. Some modern historians question the literal burial alive, suggesting it might have been a metaphorical image for mass execution. However, even if they were executed in another way, the very fact of a mass massacre of intellectuals and their persecution and destruction for dissent remains undeniable. This episode was not merely an act of cruelty. It was an act of symbolic annihilation of intellectual opposition, an attempt to suppress the very possibility of critical thinking. It became one of the darkest stains on Qin Shi Huangdi's reputation, cementing his image as a ruthless tyrant who despised knowledge and human life. The consequences of these events were catastrophic. The loss of books resulted in irreparable damage to Chinese culture. Many works were lost forever. Scholars were intimidated, and intellectual life froze. Qin Shi Huangdi's power became total and unquestioning, but the price for this was the suppression of free spirit and intellectual development. This was a lesson for future generations of rulers, a demonstration that absolute power can be achieved and maintained at the cost of freedom of thought.
The Great Wall on Bones, an era of grand sacrifices. Having conquered the lands, Qin Shi Huangdi faced a new threat: external enemies. From the north, from the steppes, nomadic Xiongnu tribes constantly raided, attacking border settlements, plundering, killing, and rustling livestock. This threat was not merely a minor nuisance. It posed a serious danger to the stability of the newly established empire. The nomads were swift, ruthless, and virtually elusive in their raids. The emperor, seeking to ensure the safety of his subjects and solidify the borders of his domain, decided to build a monumental defensive structure, the Great Wall of China. The idea of a wall was not new. Even during the Warring States period, various states built their own, smaller defensive walls to protect against neighbors and nomads. However, Qin Shi Huangdi conceived of something unprecedented in scale. He ordered all disparate walls to be connected, fortified, expanded, and new sections built, creating a single, continuous line of defense stretching thousands of kilometers from Liaodong in the east to Lintao in the west. The construction of the Great Wall, under the direction of General Meng Tian, began in 215 BCE. This was not merely an engineering project. It was a colossal mobilization of human and material resources that forever remained in popular memory as a symbol of imperial despotism and suffering. Hundreds of thousands of people were conscripted for construction. Soldiers, peasants, convicts, prisoners condemned to hard labor after the burning of books. Various sources cite figures ranging from 300,000 to 1 million people working simultaneously. Working conditions were unbearable. Construction was carried out in the harshest and most inhospitable regions of China, across high mountains, deep gorges, vast deserts, and swampy lowlands. Workers had to carry enormous stones, heavy logs, and earth on their shoulders, often over long distances. The climate was extreme, scorching heat in summer, when people collapsed from dehydration and heat stroke, and bitter frost in winter, when frostbite and hypothermia were common occurrences.
Lack of food, water, clothing, and medicine was chronic. Workers were poorly fed, living in primitive camps, often without adequate protection from the elements. Diseases such as typhus, dysentery, and plague rapidly spread among the weakened and exhausted people. Accidents, falls from heights, collapses, injuries from tools were common. Thousands, tens of thousands, and by some estimates, millions of people perished during the construction of the Great Wall. Popular memory preserved the horror of these events. The Great Wall was nicknamed the Long Wall of Wailing and the Wall of Tears. There was a belief that every stone of the wall cost a human life, that every section of the wall contained the bones and ashes of deceased builders. This legend, though not literally true, builders were not buried in the wall, vividly reflects the collective memory of the inhuman price the people paid for this colossal project. The deceased were simply buried haphazardly, often along the wall or in mass graves near construction sites. Their bones became part of the landscape, a silent testament to the monstrous scale of human sacrifice. One of the most famous and tragic legends associated with the construction of the wall is the story of Meng Jiangyu. Her husband was forcibly conscripted to build the wall, and after some time, she set out north to bring him warm clothes. Upon arrival, she learned that her husband had died from the arduous labor. From her bitter tears, a section of the wall collapsed, revealing her husband's bones, which she was able to identify and bury with dignity. This legend, passed down through generations, became a symbol of the people's suffering under the yoke of tyrannical power. The construction of the wall was just one of Qin Shi Huangdi's many mega-projects. Simultaneously, roads, canals, giant palaces such as the Afong Palace, which was intended to be the largest in the world, and his own tomb, the mausoleum with the terracotta army, were being built. All these projects demanded colossal labor resources and the harshest discipline. Heavy taxes and conscripted labor placed an unbearable burden on the peasantry, causing widespread discontent and hatred for the regime. The Great Wall we see today is mostly the result of later reconstructions and construction during the Ming Dynasty. However, its original route and foundation were laid precisely under Qin Shi Huangdi. This structure became not only a symbol of Chinese civilization, but also an eternal reminder of the price a people can pay for the ambitions of one man. The wall indeed protected the empire from northern barbarians for a time, but its construction became one of the main causes of the collapse of the Qin dynasty itself, triggering a wave of popular indignation that ultimately swept away the tyrannical regime. The pursuit of immortality and the realm of the dead, paranoia and eternity. The desire for absolute control over the lives of his subjects and over history was inextricably linked in Qin Shi Huangdi with another, no less obsessive idea, the idea of immortality. Having conquered the lands and unified all under heaven, he evidently realized that even the most powerful ruler is mortal, and his great deeds could be undone by time. The thought of the end of his reign, let alone his own death, was unbearable for the emperor, who considered himself the embodiment of heaven's will and the founder of a dynasty destined to rule for 10,000 generations. The search for the elixir of immortality became an obsession for him, consuming enormous resources and efforts. He attracted numerous mages, alchemists and Taoist hermits to his court who promised to find a miraculous potion or the dwelling place of immortals. These individuals, exploiting his naivety and fear of death, received generous funding and immense influence. One of the most famous was Xu Fu, who in 219 BCE convinced the emperor that immortals possessing the elixir of life resided on 3 mythical islands in the East Sea: Penlai, Fangzhang, and Ying Zheng. Qin Shi Huangdi equipped a massive expedition for him, consisting of several thousand young men and women who were to embark on the voyage. Xu Fu never returned, either having found new lands or simply fleeing with the emperor's resources. Nevertheless, Shi Huangdi continued to send expeditions, personally traveling along the coast in search of these islands. Parallel to the search for an external elixir, the emperor delved deeper into paranoia and fear of assassination. He constantly feared for his life, which was by no means unfounded. There had been several assassination attempts on him, the most famous of which was made by Jing Ke even before the unification of China. This paranoia reached its peak in the final years of his reign. He became secretive, frequently changing his chambers so that no one knew his whereabouts, and even issued an edict that anyone revealing his location would be executed. He traveled incognito, avoiding a permanent residence in one palace. Perhaps this paranoia was the reason for his massacre of the 460 scholars, whom he might have suspected of conspiracy or criticism capable of weakening his power. As the search for immortality yielded no results, Qin Shi Huangdi increasingly focused on preparing for his afterlife. He believed he could continue his rule in the afterlife. This belief materialized in one of the most monumental projects in human history: the construction of his mausoleum, which began immediately after his ascent to the throne in 246 BCE and continued for over 38 years until his death. Qin Shi Huangdi's mausoleum is not just a tomb, it is an entire underground kingdom designed as an exact replica of his earthly empire. The main burial chamber, according to Sima Qian's descriptions, contained a model of all under heaven with rivers of mercury flowing into an underground sea, a ceiling adorned with precious stones simulating a starry sky, and mechanical traps to protect against robbers. It was a place designed to ensure his eternal dominion. The most famous and astonishing part of this complex is the terracotta army, accidentally discovered in 1974 by peasants digging a well. These were thousands of life-sized clay warriors, horses, and chariots, each with its own unique face, detailed clothing, and weaponry. They were arranged in battle formation, ready to defend the emperor in the afterlife and continue his conquests. In addition to warriors, terracotta figures of officials, acrobats, and musicians were found, indicating the emperor's desire to surround himself in the other world with everything that constituted his earthly life. Hundreds of thousands of laborers, slaves, convicts, masters, and artisans toiled on the creation of the mausoleum. According to Sima Qian, after the completion of the mausoleum, all artisans and laborers who knew the secrets of the tomb were sealed inside, so that no one could reveal its location and treasures. This was another act of monstrous cruelty, which underscores the emperor's indifference to human life and his desire for absolute security and secrecy even after death. The terracotta army and the mausoleum as a whole are not only astonishing archaeological finds, but also a grim testament to the power and ruthlessness of Qin Shi Huangdi. They showcase his grand vision and his ability to mobilize colossal resources to achieve his goals. But they also serve as a reminder that this grandeur was paid for with immense suffering and the lives of millions of people. The pursuit of immortality on earth resulted in the creation of an eternal kingdom of the dead, where the emperor, surrounded by his clay army, remains forever frozen, awaiting eternal rule.